pose the question, where do the benefits go? I will talk about this question in a general way. I will not have any particular reference to the Icelandic system, but a lot of the stuff I'm going to say has application to the Icelandic system. Já, ég verð ekki að hafa þetta. See? Nothing happens. Okay, not that. I will start with an introduction about the evolution of fisheries management in the world. It sets the background in a different way from what Professor Eggertsson did before. First of all, in the global ocean capture fishery, there has been a long history of very, very poor fisheries management, huge waste. First of all, biological waste. According to the FAO, 75% of commercial fish stocks are fully or overexploited. And the most valuable ones are the most overexploited, naturally. The economic outcome of all of this is that there is loss of potential global profits from the fishery of the magnitude of about $45 billion US. And the industry is on top of that subsidized in the order of some $10 billion. The figures vary quite a bit from $3-4 billion up to $20-25 billion, depending on whether you like a high or low figure. It's difficult to assess, actually. And this is also, and this is important to realize in the context of the Icelandic debate, this overexploitation of the fish stocks due to inferior technical fisheries management had led to very serious displacement of fishes and fishing communities around the world, including Iceland. One does not have to know much about Icelandic history to realize that there are many previous very successful fishing villages that now have either disappeared or just a shadow of their old self, long before the advent of the IDQ system. Okay. So just to give you some numbers, there was a big study conducted by the FAO and the World Bank some years ago. I think it was completed in 2009, and it calculated the current state of the global fishery in 2004 and compared to what was calculated to be the optimal state. And in terms of biomass, the biomass in 2004 was 30 to 40% of what would be ideal. The harvest level was slightly less than would be ideal. The fishing effort was about twice what compared to what would be ideal. And the global fishery was incurring losses of about $5 billion US, but could have sustained profit of about least $40 billion. So those are the official figures. They have been published, they've been discussed around the world, and they are widely accepted. Okay, oops, this is difficult. Can you see? These problems that have been around for a very long time, but getting more and more serious, did not go unnoticed by the world authorities and by governments. Since the early 1900s, the various governments of the world have tried various fisheries management methods. Those methods have mostly, until recently, been restrictions on the various aspects of fishing, the fishing gear, the fishing areas and times, types of fishing vessels, fishing days, and total catch. Oops. The outcome of all of this, globally speaking, and also in Iceland, have been extremely disappointing. The biological results have usually been poor. These measures have not stopped the decline in the fish stocks, except in occasional cases where a TAC, total allowable catch restriction, has been imposed and strictly enforced. The economic results have been even worse. I think it's fair to say they've uniformly been very poor. These measures have not increased the profitability or the rents coming from the fisheries. rights-based management has come to the fore over the past 50 years or so. Under rights-based management, the fishers, or the fishing firms if you like, they obtain clear rights, you can call these rights property rights, in the fishery. These rights-based systems started to appear in the world in the 1960s, mainly in the form of what is called TURFs, territorial user rights in fisheries, basically in sedentary inshore fisheries, shellfish fisheries, where the fishers got some area to exploit as their own, pretty much like farmers got land to exploit. In the 1970s, ITQs came to the fore in Holland first and then in Iceland. It's really, really interesting that these measures came into being primarily as a practical administrative response to a serious fishery situation. It was not based on academic recommendation or academic innovation of any kind. And this is an interesting example from the academic perspective of practice preceding theory. The theory came after the fact in this case. So the first question is, why are fishing rights a good idea? Well, first of all, they reduce and in the best of cases eliminate the common property problem that Professor Eggertsson discussed. Thus, they encourage economic efficiency in fishing. And as my big table before showed you, there are very substantial benefits to be had from fishing. Moreover, these benefits can be held on a sustainable basis forever. The annual profits in many fisheries, potential profits, have been calculated to be easily in excess of 50% of the revenues. So those are very valuable resources. Secondly, the fishing rights encourage conservation and accumulation of capital, including natural capital. So the rights holders, they become quite a little bit like farmers, and they want to enhance the basic resource, which is the foundation for their profitability. In short, fishing rights create the correct incentives. The economic incentives we want every citizen to have that promote the public good. It's useful to look at some of these property rights that have been tried out in fisheries. They cover a wide range of arrangements. We can have licenses, fishing licenses. Those are property rights, but of low quality. We can afford quotas. Those have been tried in some countries and suggested for Iceland. We can have sole ownership, just one owner of the fishery, and there are fisheries around the world that are owned by just one company, so to speak. We can have territorial user rights, or TURFs, where there is a certain area of the ocean that is the exclusive province of one owner. We can have individual quotas or individual transferable quotas, and we can have community property rights. So these are just the examples of the property rights that can apply. Now, coming to ITQs, which is the basic topic of my talk, they came into being in the late 1970s, but have since then been adopted around the world at an increasingly fast rate. Currently, ITQs are employed in, well, over 1,000 fisheries. I believe the transparency says hundreds, but it's definitely over 1,000 different fisheries. And more than 22 significant fishing nations in the world use ITQs as a major part of the fisheries management system. And the list of some of these countries is up there on the transparency. Most tellingly, close to 25% of the global catch in volume terms is taken under ITQs. I don't have the figure in value terms, what part of the total landed value globally is taken under ITQs, but that is definitely much less. That could be about between 15 and 20%. Nevertheless, from nothing in 1970 to this stage now, indicates that ITQs have been found to be very successful. More and more nations have adopted the systems. We have now reached a point where actually the operators in the fisheries are clamoring their governments for the introduction of ITQ systems. And now it's usually governments that are holding the evolution back. This table just shows you the speed of adoption. If you look at the second column, this is by decades. In the decade 70 to 79, only 2 countries had ITQs. 80 to 89, 5 more countries came to the ITQ system. 8 more countries in the decade 90 to 99, and 7 countries in the 2000s. All in all, 22 countries. There are actually a few more. I'm counting from below, and this is what I counted. And you see the accumulation of the quantity in the third column, and you can see that the speed of adoption is getting faster in terms of volume of catches. So what has the outcome of the ITQ systems been? Well, generally quite positive. Some people would say very positive, but I try to be moderate. Biologically, I would say weakly positive. In general, ITQ systems, where they have been adopted, have led to a halt in the decline of the fish stocks, and in some cases, some people say many cases, a reversal. So the stocks have actually started to grow. And we see this primarily in the countries that were the first to adopt ITQ systems, including Iceland. And the reason, again, is that with ITQs, the fishers, the ITQ holders, have valuable property rights, and they become very, very interested in increasing the resource stocks that sustain and generate the profits. The economic outcomes are strongly positive. There is a uniform reduction in fishing effort, usually very, very fast, even immediately. There's a decline in excessive fishing capital. That, however, happens generally quite slowly because it's difficult to get rid of unnecessary boats. And quite often, the unnecessary boats are sent to some other fishing. But over time, we've seen that fishing fleets decline in countries that use ITQs. The unit price, and this is slightly surprising, it wasn't predicted by theory, but the unit price of landings has increased, often very, very dramatically. And this is also almost a uniform observation. Reason being that under ITQs, it becomes possible for the processing sector and the harvesting sector to coordinate, to bring the catches ashore when the prices are highest, to improve the quality of the landings and adjust the quality of the landings to the needs of the processing and marketing sector. Profitability increases, that's the biggest thing, usually very substantially. We are talking about taking profit from virtually zero to easily 20, 30, 50, 60% of the total revenues. So that's a big gain. Well, the case of Iceland is a case in point where we had a fishing industry generally run at a loss before the beginning of the ITQ system. Now it's running at a profit ratio that is 30 to 40% of the revenues, and still increasing, or was increasing before the newest intervention by the government. Finally, quotas become valuable. So new wealth is created in a tradable instrument. And this is a great gain. This wealth didn't exist before. Now there's a tradable instrument that is in which this wealth is denominated, and that makes it possible to use this wealth to create new capital by borrowing against the quota values and investing in something else, on top of the profits that are being generated every year from the fishery. Strangely, well, as Professor Árnason told us, in spite of this quite dramatic and clear success, ITQs have come in for a good deal of criticism, not only in Iceland, but also in other parts of the world. What are these criticisms? I've tried to collect the main points of criticism. First of all, it is often claimed that ITQs lead to increased discarding of fish. Secondly, that ITQs lead to industry concentration. We could debate whether that is good or bad, but that's another issue. This is a point of criticism. Thirdly, that ITQs induce regional changes, changes in habitation, changes in the location of the fishing industry, things like that. Fourthly, that ITQs induce alteration in production methods, production structures, and industrial structures in the fishing industry. Fifthly, which is the topic of this talk, the benefits only or primarily go to the ITQ holders and not to the general population. So, the first point is manifestly just untrue. There are many studies that have found that under ITQs, far from increasing, discards actually decrease. And there are many reasons for that we don't really have time to go into. There is some truth in it that ITQs lead to industry concentration, but if you think about it, that almost has to happen. ITQs are introduced into fisheries that are overly capitalized, too many boats, too many fishermen, and if you want to reduce the number of boats and fishermen and reduce fishing effort, you necessarily have to have fewer fishing vessels per company, and that in itself is increased concentration. Also, we may notice, for those of you who follow international fisheries, that you also see industrial concentration taking place in fisheries around the world that are not subject to ITQs. Modern days seem to be a period where bigger companies in the fishing industry are actually more profitable and more efficient. So this degree of concentration happens with and without ITQs. It's not clear at all that ITQs are an independent factor in this increased fishery concentration. Regional changes, ITQs generate regional changes. There's also some truth in this. But again, we're also seeing regional changes in countries, fishing countries that don't have ITQs. So it's unclear to what extent ITQs, in fact, have generated this effect. It's largely true that ITQs lead to changed production and technological structures, company structures, and industry structure in general. ITQs promote efficient fishing, and to the extent that that requires a new form of production methods, new form of company structures and industrial relationship, ITQs are going to promote that. And I believe that has taken place. Again, we may wonder whether this is good or bad, but it's clear that some people dislike it. The final point is basically my topic, and I'll now come to that. Okay, quite a bit of time here. Yeah. The problem is, or the beginning of that debate saying that ITQ holders get most of the benefits, is that the ITQ holders enjoy an increase in the value of the ITQ rights, often very substantial increases, and they are the first recipients of the increased profits being generated every year by the use of ITQs. But there are other factors that actually promote the subsequent distribution of ITQ benefits to the rest of the population. First of all, labor in general, labor in fishing companies shares in the profits, directly and indirectly. I'll come to that later. Secondly, increased demand generated by higher incomes in the fishing industry leads to higher incomes in other sectors of the economy that are serving the people who have increased the demand on the basis of more profits in the fishing industry. Thirdly, we shouldn't forget taxes, the normal taxes, income taxes, VAT taxes, and what have you, that also takes away a part of the profits generated by ITQs. Fourthly, very, very important factor of investment, additional investments taking place on the basis of new incomes in the fishing industry, additional incomes for the nation as a whole, part of which is going to be invested and generate higher rate of economic growth in society, in which everyone shares. And fifthly, in some countries where the fishing industry is really significant, like Iceland and several other countries, more productivity in the fishing industry will lead to higher exchange rates or more favorable exchange rate, reducing the price of imports, benefiting everyone who consumes or buys imports. So let's look at the share of labor in profits. ITQs lead to higher incomes for labor in the fishing industry for two main reasons. First of all, generally speaking, in most countries of the world, the crew has a share in the value of landings. Secondly, if there is higher profits in the fishing industry, the marginal profits of using labor becomes higher, and that is a big inducement to increase the wage rate to the labor that works in the fishing industry. So let's look at the share of the crew. And to explain that, I actually constructed a little model. I assumed that we could indicate the crew share in the landings with the Greek letter alpha. I assumed we had a reduced cost per unit catch under the ITQ system amounting to theta. And the labor being used in the fishing industry was reduced by beta. So there's a contraction in fishing effort, so you use less labor. The crew has a constant share, alpha, and there's a reduced cost in the fishing industry by theta. Then I assume that the crew that leave the fishing industry, crew members that leave the fishing industry, they receive an unchanged income somewhere else in the economy. Before the beginning of the ITQ system, they are receiving a remuneration in the fishery that's about the same they would receive in other sectors of the economy. This doesn't have to be perfectly true, but approximately this might hold. And it wouldn't change anything very much if we deviated slightly from this assumption. And secondly, just to simplify the calculations, I assume that there is no increase in the value of landings. So all the benefits from the ITQ system in this simple example come from cost reductions. In that case, I could work out this formula that the gain of the crew, the whole crew, the initial crew, compared to the gain of the firms, would be this formula. I don't expect you to see through it right away, and for that reason I drew a diagram like this, which basically gives you the gain of the crew divided by the gain of the firm, so relative gains, if you like, as a function of the share of labor or share of crew in the landed value. And you can see if the crew has zero share in the landed value, is on fixed wage, for instance, they will not gain anything. All the gains will go to the ITQ holders. But the bigger the share of the labor in the landed value, let's take 0.4 for instance, you see that their gains are between, 0.6 and 0.8 of the gains of the ITQ holders. So they get a very substantial part of the gains. It's common around the world, including Iceland, that the gains that the share of the crew is about 30-40%. Get þetta? Þetta pointer? Já, þú leysir. Já. Já. Nota niður þarf. I did these calculations. If the share of the crew is 0.3, then the gain of the crew divided by the gain of the firms is 0.43. So they get 43% of what the ITQ holders get. And if the share of the crew is 40%, then the crew gains 67% of what the ITQ holders get. And these are big numbers. And they actually fit. I did some investigation on this, and this fits with the increased salary levels of crew members under the ITQ system. Just mention this very quickly. There will be higher marginal profits in the fishing industry because of the ITQ system. unless, of course, these profits are taxed away, and that therefore the wage or labor in that industry should increase correspondingly. It's not clear at all because in other sectors of the economy, wage rates are lower or will be lower if it increase in the fishing industry. So there will be a tug of war here. But at the very least, we could claim that labor in the fishing industry is now in a much stronger bargaining position for higher salaries than before. And this could be quite significant. Increased demand, I'm not going to spend much time on that, but it's clear that increased profits in the fishing industry, increased salary levels, stuff like that, will lead to demand around the economy for goods and services, which will also benefit those people and those companies that are supplying that. How big this is difficult to say, but it could be quite significant. This requires some research to be able to put sensible numbers on this effect. Now, taxes. We all know that in most countries, taxes are a big factor of life, and most governments in the Western world are collecting between 30 and 50% of the GDP in taxes. Typical taxes are income taxes, value-added tax, and what I like to call duties and excise taxes, taxes on particular goods. These taxes often amount to between 40 and 60% of income, especially for people in the higher income brackets that pay higher income taxes. And those people in the fishing industry about which we are talking here are usually in the high income brackets. So I calculated an example that looks somewhat similar to the Icelandic situation. We have an income tax rate of 40%. We have domestic consumption out of income. You know, how much out of your income do you consume domestically, not abroad, and you do not invest? I said 60%. Value-added tax of 25%, duties and excise tax rates of 8%. That means that the total tax as a percentage of income, and therefore as a percentage of the additional income generated by the ITQ system, is about 52%. So more than half of the increased income generated by the ITQ system, both the income that goes to the ITQ holders and that goes to the crew members, and maybe some labor in the fishing industry, will be taxed away through these taxes. We could calculate, what would happen with different tax rates. So I calculated this for 30% income tax rate, and then the total tax on the fisheries rents or the fisheries profits is about 44%. And there are other numbers there as well. Economic growth, very, very important thing. It is very, very clear that when people have higher incomes, they will invest a part of that income. When the income, when at the same time the income is generated, productivity or production functions shift upwards, like they have in the fishery under the ITQ system. There is even a greater incentive to invest. And these investments will lead to added economic growth that will benefit all sectors of the economy. So here is a diagram just showing that what a 0.5% increase, 0.5% increase in growth rates would do for the economy over a number of years. So the blue curve there is for 2% economic growth per annum. The red curve is for 2.5% economic growth per annum. And the difference between these two curves, and I should say that an increase in investment by 0.5%, increase in investment that generates 0.5% more economic growth is totally reasonable within the Icelandic system. And given the Icelandic macroeconomic numbers. The difference between these two curves after 5 years is 5% of gross domestic product. And that can be expected to go widely in the economy in the first instance. After 20 years, it's 10%. After 50 years, it's 27, 28%. Those are big numbers. And it's important, of course, for any nation that has significant rents from natural resources to invest these rents wisely to generate good incomes in the future. Exchange rates, I'm getting close to the end here. Just a few points. It's clear that ITQs saving on imports and actually increasing exports will generate net exchange rate supply in the economy, increase the exchange, the currency quantity that is available. Here's just one example. I assume no increase in fish exports, which is not true because there has been a significant increase in the value of fish exports. I assume 50% reduction in the cost of fishing. I assume that the share of imports in the cost of fishing is 40%, so 40% of the cost of fishing is imported. The share of the fishery in total export earnings, 40%, and the elasticity of exchange rates to increased supply is this strange symbol there. According to this, if the elasticity of exchange rate with respect to increased quantity of currency is 1, which is a reasonable economic number, you don't have to know more than that, that's quite reasonable, then this will lead to an 8% increase in the exchange rate. So all imports will be 8% less expensive. And everyone who consumes imports or uses imports for investments will gain from this, not just the ITQ holders. In fact, the increase in the exchange rate is a direct subtraction from the profitability of fishing. Finally, the conclusions. It's inevitable to conclude that the gains from ITQs flow to other sectors of the economy in many ways, probably more ways than I've enlisted. In the short run, typical or common economic magnitudes and relationships suggest that much of the initial gains are quickly captured or flow quickly to other sectors of the economy. The labor gets a part, taxation takes a part, there are demand effects, and there are exchange rate effects. In the longer run, the benefits are enhanced and more widely spread through increased economic growth. These results should not be surprising because they fit with our historical experience from economic history, where substantial gains, substantial profitability of certain sectors in the economy have universally led to a general increase in well-being and incomes in those societies. Thank you very much.